So today I wanted to try out a different approach and take a look at the Vampire Chronicles, the novels, as well as the film adaptations. First off, we do have Interview with the Vampire, which was written by Anne Rice, published in 1976. This was the first book which did introduce Lestat, and actually before the novel had published, the rights had already been sold to Paramount Pictures. The film adaptation was released by Warner Brothers in 1994 by director Neil Jordan. He obviously heard about the project. It had been tied up for several years, obviously 20 years after the book rights had been sold, and he basically took it upon himself to make sure that this book actually did become a film. It is rumored that Anne Rice wanted Julian Sands to play Lestat, which isn't necessarily true. She always said at the time when the book was written that she saw him playing the role. Obviously 20 years later he was maybe just a little more advanced in age, probably not as proper a choice for the film. Also originally in the film as the reporter David interviewing Louis, the role had originally been cast to River Phoenix. Those segments of the film had been pushed back to accommodate as he was working on a project. Unfortunately, he did pass at a very young age. He obviously did not get to film the scenes, so stepping into the role was Christian Slater. The ending credits are dedicated to the memory of River Phoenix. So the story is obviously told from Louis' point of view. He was a plantation owner in the 1800s. He was within his 24 years of age. In the book, he lost a brother and became very depressed, wanted to end his life. In the film, he lost a wife and child, so same outcome more or less. He does go out seeking death. Lestat answers this and gives him the choice between becoming a vampire. So eventually Louis is turned, and he does battle with this for quite some time. He obviously has difficulty dealing with what he's become, taking the lives of innocent people in order to survive. So he does take to feeding off of rats. This is of course after he does set fire to his own plantation after being suspected of being some malicious creature. So during that time they do take to living in hotels. Eventually Louis does come around, feeds off of a girl who has been stricken with the plague, who is later named Claudia and becomes their vampire daughter. He is appalled with the fact that he would take a child and turn her into this creature. What is more frightening to him is the fact that this child has the same evil tendencies as Lestat. Nonetheless, he does dote on her as the child that he no longer has. This action, of course, was done in order to prevent Louis from leaving, as Lestat was beginning to catch on and suspect that Louis no longer cared for Lestat's companionship, so that was his response. 30 years do pass. Claudia realizes she will never grow up and become a woman. She, at first, is angry with Louis and Lestat. She forgives Louis, but plots to murder Lestat, and the night that she does plot to kill Lestat, Louis is obviously clueless, but does defend her nonetheless, and once again sets fire to their home. So I'm noticing somewhat of a pyro theme with Louis here. So they do travel, or they do make their travels into Europe, eventually finding a coven of vampires in Paris. Armand, who does happen to be the leader of this group, takes a liking to Louis. Claudia, who is too small, even though she is a vampire, she is too weak to fend for herself, so she requests that Louis create a companion for her. That way she can also have someone to keep her company, as she does realize that Louis will leave her. In the book, Louis does create the companion for her. The woman Madeline does live with them for a time before they are dragged off and murdered. In the film, it happens the exact night, which is a total ripoff, because if you're going to become a vampire and live the dream of never grow old and live forever and only get to enjoy that for 30 minutes at the most, that's a very cruel joke. Madeline and Claudia are imprisoned in a roofless tower, so they are burned by daylight. Louis is caged up into a iron or brass coffin with the intention of being left to starve for eternity. Armand, the schemer that he is, allows Madeline and Claudia to perish, but does take the opportunity to save Louis. Louis, obviously very angry over what did happen, murders the theater vampires and once again sets fire to their home. In the book, Louis does stay on with Armand for quite some time, although never being able to fully get over the death of Claudia. He does eventually leave Armand. In the film, I find it more fitting that he just decides not to mess with Armand at all, travels on his own. Eventually, years later, does travel back to New Orleans, where he eventually does meet up with Lestat. Lestat, hoping that Louis has returned, obviously a no, it's just a friendly hello. That basically does more or less wrap up the end of Louis' story. The boy reporter, David, played by Christian Slater, feels that it is not a suitable ending to the story and asks in turn to become a vampire. Louis, becoming angry, attacks the boy but does not harm him. Lestat, however, does take the opportunity to offer him a chance at eternity, and thus ends the film. So the second book from the Vampire Chronicles is The Vampire Lestat, which to me is more of a prequel than anything else. It does rewind a great many years back to Lestat's mortal life up until the point where he is kidnapped by the vampire Magus and turned into a vampire as well. The vampire Magus basically commits suicide by fire the exact same evening, so abandons his companion the same evening he is created. There are a bit of contradictions within the story. This was done purposely, as Anne Rice wanted you to get a feel for Lestat and decide for yourself whose version was the more true, whether Louis or Lestat, which in fictional terms does add more to the realism, as there are two sides to the story, or to the same story. Not everyone tells things exactly the same, and in typical Lestat fashion, we do assume that he will embellish a few facts to make himself seem, maybe in some events, more human or a bit more heroic. So the story does range from the 18th century up until the early 1980s. Eventually, Lestat does meet up with the vampire Marius, who does take him under his wing, teaches him about vampires. He also happens to be the guardian of those who must be kept, which are basically the pre-Egyptian king and queen, Akasha and Enkel. He does ask Lestat not to disturb them, of course. One day, walking into the chamber, taking a violin from an older companion, plays for them, wakes them, and in very slut fashion, Akasha does awaken. She exchanges blood with Lestat, and Kel, of course, being stoned himself, being in the room, witnessing this, is obviously jealous, attacks Lestat, and Marius does manage to save him, but sends him away for his own protection. The book does end with Lestat's debut concert, which basically does lead into the sequel, or the third book, which was Queen of the Damned. Originally, Neil Jordan had attempted to adapt The Vampire Lestat as well. Unfortunately, there were a great many complications which did cause problems. Warner Brothers did buy out the company which originally did hold the rights to The Vampire Lestat. Unfortunately, being unable to purchase this rights, he was just forced for the contract or the term to be over, and basically it just became much more difficult later on to be able to touch the film. So the project unfortunately was abandoned. At the time when the project actually was a possibility, there were also rumors of possibly Robert Downey Jr. taking on the role of Lestat, which to me doesn't seem a very good fit. He did clarify the rumors that he did not sign on, although there has been some talk now of trying to revive the project, and his name has come up here and there in passing, of course, no official word yet. So the following book, Queen of the Damned, which was published in 1988, basically does pick up, there's a lot of backstory as well. We do have various vampires which are introduced in this book, which seem to have reoccurring or similar dreams about red-haired twins. This is also when Akasha is reawakened by the music or the playing of Lestat's band. She murders her husband and goes off in search of Lestat. While at the concert, Jesse, who happens to be a member of the Telemasca, which is basically just a secret order which studies vampires and just keeps an eye at a distance but does not interact. She also does happen to be the descendant of one of the red-haired vampires, Maharet. So while at the concert, she is unfortunately injured. She is brought back to the compound. In order to save her, she is turned into a vampire, and this is where we learn a lot more of the backstory of the red-haired twins, Maharet and her sister Makare. During all of this, Lestat is of course not present, as he has been abducted by Akasha, and it is assumed that she has taken her as his consort. She eventually does show up at the compound with Lestat in tow. She offers them the opportunity to join her and survive, otherwise they will perish. And her grand scheme is that she will murder 90% of the world's men in order to liberate the women which have been oppressed. And her ultimate goal, of course, is to become a goddess worshipped by women. A very grand scheme indeed. So, in the film, which does grossly merge the vampire Lestat and the Queen of the Damned, in the film, she is mass attacked by the vampires and eventually drained, or close to drained, by Maharet, who is in turn becomes stone. In the book, at this moment is when Makarel does appear. She severs the head, devours the brain and heart, and basically does become the next Queen of the Damned. I really see no point in discussing too much of the film because I don't feel it was a very fair adaptation. Anne Rice herself has expressed some displeasure with the film as well. She's been quoted as referring to it as being something she can neither understand or embrace. She did encourage them not to produce her material in this way, and is obviously very hurt by the way her work has been quote-unquote mutilated. The next book in the series following Queen of the Damned is Tale of the Body Thief. This book was published in 1992. We do continue with Lestat in what was the current modern time, which was the 80s. So obviously he's abandoned his grandiose dreams of becoming a vampire rock star. In this book, he's actually fallen into a bit of a depression. He longs to be human. He's also finally feeling the weight of Claudia's death. He's haunted by nightmares of his daughter and really doesn't care too much for murdering innocents. He mostly drinks from murderers, thieves. So during this time, a psychic by the name of Raglan James does take advantage of his grief. He makes it known that he is able to change bodies and offers Lestat a proposition of trading bodies for a day so that Lestat may feel human. He is of course advised by David Tebbow, who also happens to be a Talamasca member, as well as various vampire or group members, not to take on this opportunity. Lestat, being Lestat, brashly rushes into this and gets what he deserves. Obviously his body is stolen. He has also inherited a body which also happens to be stricken with pneumonia, so he is also close to dying. Eventually he does return to his coven members, asks for help, even begs Louis at one point to turn his new body into a vampire so that he may survive. Louis, of course, saying that he should relish the fact that he is now once again human, refuses. And it is David Tebbow who basically does assist Lestat. The psychic James is obviously probably not as intelligent as he thinks he is. He has a habit of stealing things. He's also not very good at cleaning up after his messes when feeding from humans. We later do learn that James was also originally a Talamasca member who was booted for his tendencies of kleptomania, as well as he was a bit psychotic. Eventually he was imprisoned and escaped by trading bodies with a fellow inmate. So he has used this method to gain somewhat of a form of immortality. So eventually they do find James. They are able to force him out of Lestat's body so that they may make the trade back. What unfortunately does cause a bit of problem is that this is near daybreak, and after regaining his body, Lestat must flee into the darkness in order to avoid being fried. During his absence, Lestat later learns that James has taken possession of David's body. Unfortunately, in a fit of rage, Lestat attacks the body, damages the brain, which also hurts the psychic. So the brain is damaged, he is unable to escape and dies inside the host body. I will tell you that they do manage to find a replacement for David. The book actually does have two endings, kind of in the form or fashion of Great Expectations, where you have the happy ending and you have the sad ending. I don't really want to spoil that. So earlier this month, roughly around February 7th, it was announced that Ron Howard and his production company Image Entertainment have optioned the rights to Tale of the Body Thief. So hopefully this may become the next film. I actually do hope that this is a better adaptation. They're trying to treat it somewhat of a reboot. They are acting as though this is the first introduction to Lestat, and not to pour any more salt on the production, since obviously these books have had a bit of bad luck with being turned into films, but it does seem that they to some degree are cursed. And the first film, we lost River Phoenix, who did not get a chance or an opportunity to film his scenes. Aaliyah passed 6 months before the release of Queen of the Damned, as she did play Akasha, and it just kind of makes me wonder if this book is adapted to film. Hopefully whoever does take on a role will not meet a unfortunate incident, but it does kind of make me wonder, worst case scenario, who will we lose this time? But that is pretty much it for today. I will talk to you later.